I want to kick us off with our first summit talk of the day, and that is Adam talking about having fun with Hardhat. So without further ado, let's welcome Adam on stage. Hey, Adam.
Hey, how's it going?
Going great. I'll let you kick this off, and welcome.
Cool, thanks so much. Cool to be here. All right, so I guess let me share my screen. So today we're talking about having having fun with Hardhat. So I guess I preface this by saying that this is not a sort of walkthrough of how to build an app specifically with Hardhat. There are loads of really great guides out there that'll show you just that and show you how to build like all manner of apps. Here today, I really wanted, I guess, dig into Hardhat, give a bit of an overview of what it is, the toolkit, and then I guess run through some of the cool stuff that you can do with it. So I guess we're going to go gradually up the meme. So we're going to start, obviously, talk about some of the basics, local EVM, compiling contracts, deploying them. We'll talk a little bit about testing and some of the cool plugins that you can leverage if you're using Hardhat, and then some other stuff around like custom tasks, EVM manipulation, forking chains, and contract verification. So a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to obviously try and do stuff live. And so we'll see how that goes. But that's how we're kicking things off, I guess, just to really like orient level set. So yes, I'm a I guess Web3 developer, working on a bunch of stuff. I'm going to be working with Scaffold ETH. That was how I got into the space, and I know loads of folks came that same way. Doing a bunch of work with Austin. So I've worked on Nifty Ink, which was built with what was formerly known as Bwidler, and now is then became Hardhat. So I've been using Hardhat for a while. It's been cool to see the tool set develop, and I'm currently a PM working on the graph. And so hopefully, if there's time, also pull in a work in progress Hardhat plugin, which is making it easier to develop subgraphs as well. So bunch of context there. As I said, we're going to start at the top. So Hardhat is first and foremost, there's the Hardhat network. So it's basically a local Ethereum node that lets you do development and be debugging. So that's super cool. In terms of getting started, there's really good documentation. I'd encourage folks to jump into that. It's actually been revitalized quite recently, also with the organization. So Hardhat used to just be pretty agnostic. It had essentially the EVM, a bunch of stuff that you could do with it, and then a really diverse set of plugins. But more recently, they've introduced the Hardhat Toolbox, which is a sort of bundled, commonly used set of packages and Hardhat plugins that they use to get started. So one thing I did in sort of preparing for this was that I updated Scaffold ETH to use the latest version of Hardhat, and I've also pulled over to start using the toolbox. So we'll run through all of that today. So if I've got I'll share the whole screen, if it'll let me. Yeah, perfect. All right, hopefully you can see the whole screen now. Maybe, well, yeah. Cool, perfect. So yes, as I said, I'm in Scaffold ETH. We're going to run through a bunch of things today. Within Hardhat, just to orient folks, there's, again, great content online on getting it installed, but the heart of Hardhat in any place is the Hardhat config file. So essentially, this is a configuration file where you say, okay, when you're running Hardhat, here are the things that I want to pull in, here are the things I want to use. So one of the first things that you'll almost always do when you're working with Hardhat is you'll run a local chain. So essentially, if I'm running this, here I'm running a Hardhat chain. And what does that mean? It's basically running a little Ethereum virtual machine on my laptop, which I can deploy contracts to. So maybe we'll start with that. And if I run yarn deploy, we'll see a bunch of stuff happening. Essentially, to orient folks, I'm in this Hardhat directory. I've got my Hardhat configuration file, which, as I said, has a bunch of stuff, which we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Then we've got my smart contract in here in the contracts folder. So this is a super simple, this comes with Scaffold ETH, but it's a super simple contract which lets you set purposes. So this one doesn't let you do much apart from set a new purpose, and it emits an event whenever that purpose is set. So what I did was I spun up that local chain. So you can see this chain running, and then I essentially deployed. So actually, if I deploy to that network, localhost So if I deploy to this network, fantastic, good start. Let's see. Seems to have deployed. So now if I run back, and now if I actually run a local app, just so we can interrogate and see some stuff that's going on, we can get a sense. And this is, yeah, as I said, using the Scaffold ETH framework, but we're going to really dig into some of the stuff that you can do with Hardhat. So essentially, if we look at this this contract, and if we pull it out here, if we go to the Hardhat config, just to like orient people to some stuff that's going on in here. So firstly, Hardhat has this really cool plugin-based model where you can pull in plugins which others have developed or that the Hardhat team have developed, which are relevant and interesting. So one example is the, so that's calling the localhost. So one example of a plugin which is imported here is the Tenderly plugin that lets you leverage loads of stuff that, that the Tenderly team can do, everything from like interrogating local transactions to verifying your contracts. The Hat Toolbox I kind of talked about earlier, and the Hardhat deploy plugin is a really great community-based plugin from Wigglewag, which essentially lets you manage all your deployments. So just to dig into that a little bit more, deployment in Hardhat can be done in a bunch of ways, but this Hardhat deploy plugin is really great because it gives you lots and lots of control when you're deploying your contracts. So to orient you in terms of what happens here, if we go into this deploy folder, which is how Hardhat deploy works, it'll essentially run all of these deployments. So this is deploying your contract. So when you run Hardhat deploy, it'll essentially run through these and run all of these, run all of these migrations. So this first deployment of your contract is essentially getting deployed here. It's then getting deployed, and there's a bunch of other stuff here which shows you some of the power of what you can do with Hardhat, but it's pretty simple to start with. So if we jump back to the front end, debug contracts, we can see this first one in here. So that doesn't seem to have worked nicely. Okay, now perfect. Yeah, this is good, always good. Live demo stuff. Okay. Let's go up here, 545. Cool. Let's see if we can fix this. Cool. That's kind of working. Actually, maybe we will see if that deployed. Okay, I know what this is. Okay, classic node compatibility, and then use. Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. That's we're off and we're rolling. All is well now. So if we now go back to the local host, we can see this contract. So we're building Unstoppable Labs. And now if I call this contract, firstly, if I grab some funds from the faucets, so one really great thing about a local chain, which you're running, is that you can pretty much do whatever you want. So here I initiated a little transaction to myself, sending myself some ETH so I can actually start transacting. So testing with Hardhat. Okay, if I send that, fantastic. You can see I'm making this transaction. I set the purpose, and then you can see that the purpose is now updated. So I'm interacting with a local chain. So then one cool thing that often when you're working with Hardhat is you'll be debugging your smart contracts. A cool thing which you can do, which you can't do with a normal chain, is essentially console logging. So that classic thing that you want to do essentially when you are you may be debugging a contract. So Hardhat have a special console.log, console.sol contract which you can import into your contract, so you can start to do some debugging. Maybe not so relevant to this, like in this super simple case, but it might be that you want to test why a certain logic branch isn't being passed down, and so console logging from within your contract will let you do that. So to keep moving forwards, I'll save this, I'll redeploy my contract, So essentially, it gets detected the contract's changed, so it then needs to compile again. It's compiled. You can see it's deployed again. We go down here. And now if we go in here, you can see that we've got a whole new contract. The front end's hot reloaded, but now if I call a different one, hopefully log, my smiley face. And you can see that this got console logged here. So this is a really cool thing that you can do with Hardhat to essentially be maybe debugging contracts, maybe checking that variables have changed as you'd expect during execution. I would say the one thing which I've sometimes done when deploying is to forget to get rid of this this import, because it's obviously extra code to deploy to the chain. That's one cool thing you can do with Hardhat. So let's just jump back to the things. As I said, there's some cool things, but also potential gotchas when you're using different plugins. So one thing is that if you want to, say, redeploy your contract, in this case, Hardhat deploy detects that actually the contract's not changed at all. You might just want to and so it just reuses the same one. It might be that for whatever reason you actually do want to reset the deployment. So in this case, you can call reset and it'll redeploy the contract and give you a whole fresh new app again. So that is the basics, the bare bones, and this is really cool because you can basically be adding new functionality to your contract. So let's see when this is going to be relevant. Timestamp, and if we go public view returns mint 256, we can do this, and we can do block number as well. Okay, yeah, these two new functions, we can deploy these guys. So essentially, it's a really good place to be iterating and developing your contracts. So these will get deployed. We now have these new two fields which show up here. And yeah, we'll talk about them again in a second. So then in terms of the next stuff that you can do with Hardhat, which, so we've covered pretty much the local EVM, compilation and deployment. Next thing that you can do is testing, coverage and gas reporting. So let's run through those. So if I run yarn test here, essentially I run some tests. So these are some unit tests which are run, and actually I've jumped ahead here because you can kind of see this at the bottom. So essentially these are just unit tests. So if we jump into my test, you can see essentially the tests that we've just run. So what are we doing here? So essentially this is getting run on it's an instantiated local Hardhat node, and essentially checks a bunch of things which you expect to happen when you're working with the contract. So for example, you can test that your contract's deployed properly. You can test that when you call a given function, it has the effect that you'd expect. And then you can also check, for example, that an event is emitted when you call that contract. So that's, again, the kind of stuff which is moving to from sort of hacking, iterating, working on contracts towards something that looks more like sort of software development best practices. And so, again, a really rich toolkit. And one thing that Hardhat have also recently introduced is their own sort of matches, which haven't fully dug into, but again, is moving away from where they were using a sort of a prior truffle library. But so testing can give you a lot more confidence when you're making changes to your contract that they're not having sort of side effects that you wouldn't expect, and to make sure that actually when you've implemented things, that the result is what you would expect. So you can do all that within the sort of within the Hardhat framework. There's some other cool stuff that you can kind of get when you're running your tests. So this table at the bottom is one of them. So this is again something that comes in the Hardhat toolbox. And if we jump back to the Hardhat config, you can kind of see where this is configured, which is the gas reporters. So obviously there's a large school of thought who are very focused on gas optimizations within smart contracts. And so this is one where if we look at this, this report, this essentially takes all of the tests that were run during the tests and sees what the sort of gas usage was for those tests. And so you can see within this gas currency, this gas reporter thing, this is coming bundled in with the toolbox. But essentially, if you call enabled get true, so I mean, if I run this again without it, you just have the sort of output of the tests. Whereas if I run with it again, you can kind of see this table, which gives you this put. And so then you can start to see, as you're making changes to your contracts, how that's then impacting different things. So for example, if we add a UN256, let counter equal counter, and then if we do now if we do yarn test, see if I give it a second, you can now see that the increase in gas usage, because essentially I've added this new storage update, and so that's again a thing where you can start to optimize, start to keep track of the cost of just different actions. The last thing I think I'd call out, and I just in the interest of time, I think I called this in, was essentially the coverage command. So this is again similarly running your tests, but also giving you a sense of the coverage of your tests. So if we jump back to my contract, you can see that my contract, I added a bunch of functions here. And if we look at my tests actually only really test out the set purpose function. So this is identifying, if we jump in here, that actually there are some lines which haven't been covered by my tests, some the percentage of functions which haven't been covered by my tests. And again, this is a thing that just comes bundled in with the Hardhat toolbox. So again, you can not only be running tests and feel confident that your changes are not having unexpected impacts, but you can also have an understanding about actually how thorough your test coverage is. So that's testing. There's a bunch of cool stuff there. If we go back to the meme, we can see that we've covered testing, coverage, and gas reporting. And so then I guess we can jump into some of this like slightly more advanced stuff you can start to do with Hardhat. So we're going to talk about tasks, EVM manipulation, forking, and verification. So for example, so if we jump back to the code, if we go back to the Hardhat config, again, just to orient you on the stuff that's going on in this file, we're importing a bunch of plugins that are useful. We're configuring a bunch of essentially exports or modules, and so a lot of these are actually networks that we want to interact with. You saw me like changing the network that I was interacting with, so that network configuration is a big thing here, and obviously folks in Scaffold ETH want to interact with a lot of networks here. You've got the OVM, you've got some of the again API keys or like configuration for some of the other plugins, but then at the bottom here we've got a bunch of tasks. So within Hardhat you can define a lot of tasks and scripts. So tasks and scripts, there's actually a post in the documentation about when you should use one or the other, and focus on tasks today. But essentially these essentially little snippets that can be run in the context of the Hardhat environment, so you can start to interact with your chain, with your contracts. So let's run through a couple of those. I guess, yeah, so if we go Hardhat world, on this one, you can see that I just ran this task, which didn't do much. It just console logged hello world. So that's not necessarily that interesting, but then you can start to see like other interesting stuff that you can do. So one thing you could do is you could deploy contracts, or you could update state variables, or you could interact with your contracts on chain through these tasks. But the thing I want to now dig into is some of the other things that you can do within Hardhat, which is kind of interesting. So that's essentially starting to manipulate the EVM. So if we take this one, so this npx Hardhat hour, if we jump back to here, essentially this is one of these sort of essentially Hardhat manipulations you can do, where you can interact with the Hardhat virtual machine to change some variables. So essentially there are a few of them that I've called out here. One is to mine a new block, so that's just to add a new block number to the chain, and this one is to change the time on the chain. So you might want to do this when you've got a variable which is like maybe you've got a game and actually you can only close the game after a certain amount of time, but you don't want to wait that amount of time. You just want to sort of move forwards in time. So if we go back again to the Ethereum app, just because then we can, I guess, have a look at the stuff that's going on in the front to get a sense of what's going on. If we go again, add an hour, and then we interact these. Okay, I know what this is. Perfect. So now we can see we mined an empty block. So when we mine that empty block, you can see that actually jump forward an entire hour. So this is a timestamp. Similarly, the block number is updated. So this is the thing where you can start to interact with the chain. And so these feel like relatively small things that you can do, but there are some others that actually let you do other stuff. So for example, like you might want to adjust your balance. So there's a help which actually lets you set the balance for a given account. So if we go back to this guy using hello.adamfuller.eth, if we take this and if we say, okay, give me ETH, I'm going to run essentially this one, run give me ETH, pass my address in here. So you can see this task was defined with this name. I added this address parameter. And then what happens is that the helpers set the balance of my account to 5 Ether. So you can see currently I've got $15, so 0.1. So we run in here. And now if we refresh, I've now got 5 Ether. You can see it's not added 5, it's actually just set my balance to 5. So if I then wanted to change this, maybe if I wanted to give myself 50 or 49 Ether, if I do this again, you can see set my balance again, you've got 49 Ether here. So again, just ways in which you can start to manipulate the state. And so again, so we've gone from like adding the time, we've gone to mining blocks, we're going to setting balance. What about doing something even more interesting? So this task lets you take some die. So this should actually be die. So this is a helper which lets you essentially define a user who's essentially impersonating an account. So to impersonate a sender, which then lets you make transactions on their account, which you could never normally do in a sort of normal context, and send yourself some well, of any specified token in this case. So just to interrogate this again, this is called take some die. Given a token address, a sender, and a receiver, it creates this, and this can actually be much simpler. It essentially takes an ABI, which is an ERC20 ABI. It then impersonates the sender account. So Hardhat will just assume the signer is the sender account. It then essentially instantiates a contract with ethers and then transfers some of that token to you. So again, this is one where actually there's an interesting dynamic here. So we're jumping into another thing you can do, which is to not just start your local EVM from nothing, but to do it from a fork. So this is one where I'll run a special command. So I've just cancelled my local EVM and I'll run a yarn fork. So if we take this, see I've started a yarn fork, and I'll deploy things to it. Deploy. If I refresh, so actually I've got $17 on this, which is the account I have. If I were to connect on localhost, switch network, refresh my network, you can see that actually you can see it's forked from mainnet because it's got the amount of that I've got in this account on mainnet. You can actually then deploy a contract in the same way that you otherwise would, and so then essentially, given this, I'm now essentially interacting with a chain which looks exactly like mainnet. So again, this is a super cool thing which Hardhat lets you do because you can actually start to interact with this chain. Lets you interact with this chain as if it is a real chain. So so this is one where essentially if we go to die, refresh this, like this is the die contract on this is the die contract on mainnet, but my local fork is essentially looking at this. And so the way that this works, if we go to package.json, is that when you run fork, essentially you run a normal Hardhat node, but you specify an RPC to use for the fork. And so then essentially whenever you call for state that's only on the main chain, that it'll essentially defer to and use this RPC. And so that's, again, like a really powerful unlock if you want to maybe simulate or test what happens. I've used this in scenarios where I wanted to check what happened or verify that a bunch of transactions would have the outcome that I wanted them to. I could fork mainnet, run those transactions on my local EVM, maybe generate a bunch of signatures that do those kind of things, and not worry too much about and then I could have confidence when I actually executed them on the real chain that things would happen as expected. Anyway, so where was I? If I jump back to what that then allows me to do is then if I say, okay, let's take some DAI and save this. So this is, again, on the localhost network. This is the DAI contract and sending from this DAI person to, and I'd want to specify my address here. I think that's the right one. I'll run this. You can see now, if we take my address, if we take my balance, you can see I've got 5 DAI. I've just given myself 5 DAI. Again, if I run that again, and I run that address again, I've got 10 DAI. And so again, one final really cool cool thing you can do, you can fork the network, you can send yourself DAI, you can act as other people, is a cool thing to do with Hardhat. Final thing, I think, so again, this is just to talk to the plugin, like all of the plugins that exist on well, actually, one other thing you can do is essentially verify contracts. So one thing I could do if I want to deploy is I could actually deploy to Rinkeby. I could deploy this contract to Rinkeby. I'll do that now. This is actually deploying live to a testnet. One final thing that you can get out of the box is verifying your contracts. So now if I essentially take this contract, ID, if we actually go and look at it on Rinkeby, that one, scan Rinkeby, we are going to be literally up to the minute. If we run in here, take a look at this contract, did that work? Looks like it may not have. Maybe we're not going to make it at the last minute. Let's see. Okay, it's still indexing, but it should show up in a second. One final thing we can do, maybe it's not going to show up until this indexes, is essentially verify contracts. And so if I run this last yarn verify network Rinkeby command with this address, call this will then verify the contract. We take the contract here, perfect. See, it's submitted for verification. And any minute now, it should hopefully come back and it'll be verified. And that's it, I think. We'll wait for the verification result. So now if we refresh back in here, last thing, there's the verified contract. And that's all I got.
Amazing. Well, as usual, this wouldn't be a talk if something doesn't go slightly according to plan, but this was great. A lot of interesting tips and tricks, and I'm glad that it's recorded because I got to really dig into some of these commands to actually do this on my own too. So appreciate this, Adam. Thank you so much. I hope everybody in the audience enjoyed this primer as well. And unfortunately, we are a little bit over time, so we don't have any time for questions. But if there are any that come up, I will send them to you directly, and then we'll answer them back to you, the person who asked those questions on the chat. So thank you so much.